Here is the content for Part 1, Introduction, Watching It Burn. Word count, error 500. My name is Hailey. I'm 28, live in Portland, and last Saturday I watched my best friend's wedding fall apart in real time. Not just a small mishap or an awkward toast. I'm talking full-blown chaos that turned a luxury ballroom into something that looked like the aftermath of a food fight between billionaires. It started as a perfectly polished live stream. Gold candles flickered in crystal holders, the string quartet played something classical, and guests in sleek dresses murmured quietly while waiting for the ceremony. I had my laptop propped on the coffee table, wine glass in hand, wrapped in a soft throw blanket, expecting to cheer Zoe on from a distance. Instead, I watched her face break on camera. 1 second, she was dancing with Lucas, smiling like she meant it. The next, a video started playing that no one expected. And then a woman in a red dress stepped into the reception hall, like it was a movie set and she was the star. People gasped, glass shattered, someone shouted. Zoe froze right there on the dance floor, eyes wide with disbelief. I couldn't move. I just sat there watching the people I used to know unravel. It felt like everything was happening underwater. I could see it all, hear the muffled sounds, but none of it felt real. The livestream glitched for a second, froze on Zoe's face mid-tear, and somehow that still image cut deeper than the chaos itself. And I thought, how did we get here? Zoe and I had been inseparable for years. We knew each other's secrets, shared way too many Friday night takeout dinners, and once swore we'd never let a man come between us. But as I sat there watching her world collapse, it hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. That wasn't just her wedding falling apart. It was the moment I realized I had spent too much of my life on the sidelines, always supporting, always cheering, always staying quiet when something felt off just to keep the peace. That night, watching Zoe's wedding unravel like a slow-motion car crash, I finally saw it. I had been living like a backup dancer in a show I didn't even audition for, and it was time I stopped pretending the spotlight wasn't meant for me too. Here is the content for Part 2, The Girl Who Always Got Picked. First. Word count, error 800. Zoe and I met in second grade. She had 2 French braids, sparkly sneakers, and the loudest laugh in the room. I was the quiet kid in the back with a peanut butter sandwich and a book I wasn't supposed to be reading during math. From the very beginning, she was the one everyone noticed. She got invited to every birthday party, picked first, for dodgeball, asked to read out loud in class because teachers said she had a confident voice. I wasn't jealous, not really. It was more like I watched her shine from the wings and felt lucky to be close to someone that bright. By middle school, she had a following, not in a mean girl way. People just gravitated toward her like she carried some secret warmth you wanted to stand near. We spent every weekend together, trading secrets and sleeping bags and choreographing dances we never performed. She always led, I always followed. It felt safe. High school didn't change much. She was homecoming princess and student council president. I was yearbook staff and debate club. She dated the quarterback. I had a 2-week crush on a guy from marching band who didn't know my name. But still, Zoe and I stuck together. Friday night movies, late night calls, shared playlists on burned CDs. We were different, but constant. Sometimes people asked how we stayed so close. She was glitter and noise. I was comfortable silence. I'd laugh it off and say we balanced each other. But the truth is, there were moments I felt small next to her, like she had this orbit and I was just one of the satellites trying to stay close without drifting too far. There were times she'd introduce me to new friends and I'd see the subtle shift. They'd smile at her stories, nod politely at mine. It wasn't anyone's fault, it was just how things worked. Zoe was the main character. I was the reliable sidekick. Still, I never pulled away. Even when she forgot to invite me to that one spring break trip claiming she thought I'd be out of town. Even when she posted group photos with captions like my favorite girls, and I wasn't in them. I'd text something casual, pretend not to care, and remind myself that we were solid underneath it all. After college, we drifted for a bit. Different cities, new relationships, but whenever something big happened, breakups, job rejections, birthdays that felt too quiet, Zoe would call, and I always answered. I never told her when I was busy. I never let it show when her calls felt more like lifelines for her than invitations for me. Looking back now, I think I held on to our friendship like it was proof I mattered. If Zoe still needed me even a little, then I must be worth something. I confused being dependable with being chosen. I mistook proximity for belonging. And somewhere along the way, that awe I used to feel when watching her take the lead started to shift. It wasn't anger or even resentment, just a quiet wondering if maybe I had spent too long applauding someone else's story and forgotten to write my own. Here is the content for Part 3, The Invitation That Felt Like a Warning. Word count, routine 600. The envelope came on a Wednesday, thick and cream-colored with gold script that spelled out my name like it was a wedding favor. I sat at the kitchen counter holding it for a moment longer than necessary, then slid my thumb beneath the seal. Inside was the invitation, of course, and a handwritten note from Zoe, bubbly and perfect as always. She said she hoped I could be there and that she'd save me a spot as one of her bridesmaids. One of. The next line hit harder than I wanted it to. Tara's my maid of honor, can't wait for you to meet her. I stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something kinder. Tara, her new best friend from the law firm, the one who tagged her in endless rooftop brunch photos and used inside jokes as captions. I'd never met her, but I already knew what role she played. The kind of friend who shows up just in time to take the lead in someone else's life. The kind who fits into the picture so well you start to wonder if you were ever really part of it to begin with. I told myself it didn't matter, that titles were just labels, that being there for Zoe even on the edge of the bridal party was still enough. But something felt off, like I'd been quietly demoted and expected to smile about it. What made it worse was knowing who she was marrying. Lucas had been around for years. He was the guy in our friend group who always lingered after game nights and helped carry in groceries when nobody asked. I liked him before Zoe did. Not that I ever said anything. Just one of those quiet crushes you tuck into a corner and visit when no one's looking. Then one night she texted me. Guess who asked me out? I remember staring at the screen, heart sinking. I wanted to be happy for her. I told her it was great. And for a while, I convinced myself I meant it. Now they were getting married. And I was getting a dress I didn't choose, standing behind a woman I barely knew. Watching someone I once liked say vows to a girl who always got what she wanted. I placed the note back in the envelope and stared out the window for a long time. Somewhere in the distance, someone else's life was unfolding exactly as planned, and mine felt like it had been edited out of the main storyline. Here is the content for Part 4, From Best Friend to Bridezilla. Word count Rieger, $1,000. The wedding planning took off like a freight train, and Zoe was the conductor with no brakes. At first, I thought it was excitement. Pinterest boards, spreadsheets, color swatches arriving in the mail like party favors. But something shifted fast. Every conversation became a checklist, and every checklist felt like a performance. She used to send voice notes about random dreams or the way her new shampoo smelled. Now it was spreadsheets, budget talk, and vendor crises. Every word came wrapped in stress, and somewhere between the floral contracts and the seating chart politics, she stopped sounding like herself. Tara was everywhere, organizing Zoom calls, sending group messages, making decisions Zoe used to let me weigh in on. It didn't take long before she was calling the shots, even though Zoe still wore the crown. Tara would text the group about bridesmaid dress fittings with little notes like just loop Hailey in when she's free, and I'd sit there blinking at my phone, wondering when I got downgraded to afterthought. The first fitting was at a boutique downtown and I flew in for the weekend. Zoe hugged me at the door, but it felt practiced. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She introduced me to the stylist as my high school bestie, like I was a relic from a former life. Tara was already there, flipping through fabrics like a co-planner, sipping cucumber water like she belonged. I tried on the dress without complaining. It was champagne-colored, strapless snug in places I didn't love. The other girls oohed and nodded. Zoe said it looked fine, but maybe a little more cardio before the big day wouldn't hurt. I laughed, then realized she wasn't joking. I swallowed it down, told myself she was just under pressure, that bridezillas were a meme for a reason, but it got worse. Every time I spoke up about something small, like maybe we didn't need personalized robes with titles embroidered on the back, I got a condescending smile from Tara and a silent glance from Zoe. It was like I had wandered into a club I used to belong to, only to find my key no longer worked. The group chats got louder, constant pings about hair trials and lip gloss shades, and when I didn't respond fast enough, Tara would nudge me privately with passive lines like, just making sure you're staying looped in. I hated how I started dreading every notification. I hated how I didn't say anything. It all boiled over during a phone call about the final fitting. Zoe was talking fast, listing photo angles and how the bridesmaids needed to coordinate poses. I asked gently if I could maybe get a slightly looser fit on the dress, just so I wouldn't have to worry about pulling it up every 2 minutes. There was a pause. Then she said, maybe you should try cutting back on the comfort food. It was said like a joke, but the silence after landed like a slap. I said nothing for a second too long, and she filled the space with words that still echo. This is my wedding, Hailey. I need everyone to look their best. I can't have anything that throws off the aesthetic. That was the moment something cracked. I don't know if it was my pride or my patience, but I hung up and stared at my ceiling for a long time. She didn't call back. Tara texted the next day with a smiling emoji and a time slot for the spray tan appointment. I showed up. I smiled. I wore the dress. But something had changed. Not just between us, but inside me. For the first time, I stopped defending her in my head. I stopped pretending this was just temporary, and I started wondering what kind of friend only wanted you when you fit the picture she was curating for someone else's approval. Here is the content for Part 5A, Picture Perfect, Until It Cracked, Word Count, Arger $1,000. I woke up early the morning of Zoe's wedding, even though I had nowhere to be. The live stream wasn't scheduled until later in the afternoon, but I spent hours getting ready like I had somewhere to go. I curled my hair, put on the soft navy dress I would have worn if I'd flown in and laid out a little spread of food like it was my own private reception. There were strawberries, a wedge of brie, and a bottle of Prosecco I'd been saving for something worth celebrating. I strung fairy lights across my bookshelf and lit a candle that smelled like eucalyptus and sugar. It felt silly at first, but sitting there alone in my Portland apartment, I needed something that made me feel like I still belonged. When the link finally loaded, the screen flickered to life with a perfect shot of the ceremony space. A sweeping garden framed by white arches, roses in pale pink and ivory spilling over every surface. Rows of gold chairs lined up in impossible symmetry. It looked like a magazine cover. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning for familiar faces. I saw Zoe's parents in the front row, her mom already dabbing under her eyes, her dad stiff in his tux. Guests filled the seats in soft pastel colors and tight, polite smiles. The camera lingered on clusters of people chatting, drinking from flutes, checking phones. There was a strange distance in their body language, like no one knew each other very well, just enough to fake it for the day. Then the camera shifted to the bridal suite. Zoe sat at a vanity, her hair in soft waves, veil pinned just right. Her makeup was flawless, but her expression wasn't. She smiled when the stylist handed her a tissue, but it was delayed. Her shoulders were tense, eyes darting to the mirror, then to someone just off screen. I couldn't hear anything, but I didn't need to. The bridesmaids fluttered around her like anxious birds. Tara, front and center, adjusted Zoe's train, checked her own phone, whispered to someone, then quickly smiled when the camera turned her way. The energy in the room was all wrong. Too rehearsed, too brittle. I'd seen Zoe nervous before, but never like that. The feed cut to Lucas and his groomsmen in a separate room. They were laughing, tossing back drinks, fixing pocket squares with clumsy fingers. Lucas looked sharp in his suit, but not present. His eyes were unfocused, his movements automatic. He laughed when one of the guys nudged him, but it didn't reach his face. I paused the video for a second, stared at his frozen frame, then pressed play again. Back at the ceremony space, the guests were settling into their seats. The music changed, the processional began. One by one, bridesmaids walked down the aisle, and I finally saw Zoe step into view. Her father held her arm like he was carrying porcelain. She looked radiant, technically speaking. The dress was custom, the veil floated behind her like mist. But something in her face stopped me cold. It was her smile, the one she had practiced for cameras, tight at the edges, too still in the eyes. I'd seen that expression before, years ago when she visited her grandfather's funeral and pretended she was fine. The kind of look you wear when you're playing a part you didn't audition for. She glanced out at the crowd, searching, not for Lucas, for something else. Maybe her mom, maybe Tara, maybe a way out. Her steps were steady, but her body didn't relax. I whispered to no one, "Breathe, Zoe, just breathe." The officiant welcomed everyone, his voice warm but distant through the live stream mic. I tried to stay focused. I told myself I was being paranoid, that weddings are stressful, that she was probably just overwhelmed. But deep down, something tugged at me. It was like watching someone walk into a building that looked beautiful from the outside, but you could smell the smoke. like you knew something was already burning behind the walls and no one else had noticed yet. I took another sip of Prosecco and leaned back, letting the screen wash over me. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the bouquet. Her eyes flicked to Lucas, then away. I remembered a version of her that used to sneak into my dorm room crying over breakups and bad grades. That girl was nowhere in sight. In her place was a stranger wearing perfection like armor, a girl with $1,000 dress and $1,000,000 smile who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. And for the first time since this wedding began, I felt a knot of dread that I couldn't explain. Here is the content for Part 5B, When the Past Crashes the Party, word count, Irfred's $1,000. The reception had just started when it happened. Zoe and Lucas had finished their first dance, something slow and polished that looked more choreographed than intimate. The applause hadn't even died down when the DJ asked everyone to turn their attention to the big screen. I sat up straighter on my couch thinking it would be one of those cheesy montage videos, childhood photos, a few grainy clips of college parties, a voiceover about love and timing. Instead, a pop song started playing, something upbeat and way too modern for the vibe, and a photo of Lucas filled the screen. He looked younger, happier, his arm wrapped around a blonde woman in a red dress I didn't recognize. Then another photo. Same woman, different city. Her lips on his cheek, his hands on her waist. My mouth went dry. The guests in the ballroom were silent. No laughter, no clapping, just a low rustle of disbelief that seemed to ripple through the room like a wave hitting concrete. I froze. The woman wasn't Zoe. The photos kept coming. Lucas with her at what looked like a ski lodge, timestamps from just a few months ago, a holiday party with them in matching sweaters, another shot at a beach tangled in each other like no one else existed. The music changed, suddenly fading into something darker, and the final image appeared. It was the woman holding a handwritten sign, smiling wide. The words on it read, "Call me when you're ready for the real thing. Love, Sabrina." I dropped my glass. On screen, Zoe stood completely still. Her face was pale, eyes locked on the screen like she didn't understand what she was looking at. Lucas hadn't moved either. His expression was frozen, not in denial, but in dread. And before anyone could react, the ballroom doors opened. There she was, the woman from the photos, Sabrina. She walked in like she belonged there, wearing a red dress that matched the one from the slideshow, heels clicking against the floor with calm precision. The room gasped. Zoe staggered back a step, her bouquet slipping slightly from her hands. I couldn't breathe. Sabrina stopped just a few feet from the dance floor and gave a small wave like she was greeting old friends. I watched through the screen as heads turned, phones came out, whispers escalated. No one moved to stop her. No one said a word. Lucas finally stepped forward, face flushed, trying to speak, but Sabrina just smiled and tilted her head. I couldn't hear what she said, but whatever it was made Zoe flinch. The DJ had left his booth. The photographer stood frozen, camera still in hand but forgotten. Zoe turned to Lucas, said something sharp fast. He shook his head, raised his hands. She asked again. He didn't answer. I leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding like I was the one being confronted. My pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't a twist. It was a collapse. Sabrina stepped forward again, and this time someone tried to intervene. One of the bridesmaids, maybe. It didn't matter. Zoe walked away from them all and stood alone under the chandelier, her veil trembling with every breath. The camera zoomed in just enough for me to see the crack in her composure split wide open. And in that moment, something inside me snapped too. All the times I had doubted my instincts, all the little comments, the quiet shifts, the way Zoe never really looked at Lucas, the way she used to look at the world, all of it made sense now. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had used her to hold a place while he waited for someone else. I pressed a hand to my chest like it might help steady the ache there. Zoe's voice finally came through the feed, small but steady. She asked who Sabrina was. Lucas tried to laugh it off, but no one joined him. His mother stepped forward to say something about Sabrina being family friends, about things being complicated. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore except the look on Zoe's face as she realized the truth in front of everyone she loved. I sat there completely still, watching everything fall apart. Not in pieces, not slowly, but all at once. Like the air had been pulled out of the room and no one remembered how to breathe. And somehow, in the middle of that storm, Zoe stood taller than I'd ever seen her. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared at the woman who thought she could walk in and take everything. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the real Zoe. Not the one who smiled for cameras, not the one who coordinated centerpieces or posed for engagement shoots, but the one who had something left to fight for, even if it was just herself. Here is the content for Part 6A, Scream Secrets and a Cake in the Face. Word count, harder 1,000 dollars. For a few seconds after Sabrina's entrance, no one moved. It was like the entire wedding had gone into shock. The music had stopped, the waitstaff stood frozen near their trays, and Zoe just stared at Lucas, like she was trying to recognize a stranger wearing his face. Then she stepped toward him, bouquet still clutched tight in her hand, and asked a question I couldn't hear, but didn't need to. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sabrina, on the other hand, had no hesitation. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, held it up like a courtroom exhibit. From my screen, I couldn't see what it said, but Zoe could. She looked once, then again, and her entire body stiffened. Lucas tried to reach for her arm, but she pulled back before he could make contact. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Chairs creaked. Someone near the front stood halfway uncertain. Zoe's mother looked like she was about to faint, one hand to her chest. Lucas finally found his voice and said something, but his tone was wrong. Defensive. Accusing. Like he was the victim in this chaos. And then Zoe threw the champagne. She didn't aim for his face. Not exactly. But the splash covered his chest and the front of his suit, and the sound of gasps was so loud I actually flinched behind my laptop screen. Sabrina let out a laugh, sharp and satisfied. Lucas just stood there, soaked and blinking, as if he didn't understand what had just happened. The guests started rising, not to help, just to get a better view. One of Lucas's groomsmen stepped toward Zoe, saying something I couldn't catch. She turned to him with eyes blazing, and I could feel her voice even without the audio. Another bridesmaid pulled Zoe gently back, trying to calm her, but the fire had already caught. It was too late to put anything out. Zoe's father crossed the room toward Lucas, face flushed and jaw tight. Lucas's father stepped between them. It wasn't a fight at first, just a harsh word, a pointed finger, a warning. But then one of them pushed the other and everything tipped. The two men clashed in the middle of the ballroom. Not fists exactly, but enough to knock over a floral display and send a tray of champagne crashing to the floor. Sabrina stepped back just in time to avoid a flying flute. The photographer snapped a shot. I saw the flash. Then the camera tilted wildly, someone bumped into the livestream tripod, and I almost lost the signal. I hit refresh. Twice. When the screen steadied, I saw Zoe standing alone near the cake table. Her makeup had started to smudge, and her bouquet lay discarded on the floor. Tara rushed to her side, whispering, gesturing toward the exit. But Zoe wasn't moving. She looked like she had rooted to the spot. Behind her, Lucas's mom shouted something about family disgrace and timing and how Sabrina never should have had to watch this mess. Sabrina just smiled. Lucas's father yelled about reputation. Zoe's mother said she didn't care about reputation, only her daughter. Someone bumped into the cake table. It didn't fall right away. It wobbled once, then again, as if deciding whether to give in, and then it collapsed. 7 layers of fondant sugar flowers and raspberry cream crashed to the ground in a slow, horrible avalanche. I actually said no out loud to no one as it all hit the floor. The silence that followed felt enormous. Zoe looked at the cake, then at Lucas, then down at the ring on her finger. She pulled it off and tossed it toward him. It didn't hit. It bounced once on the floor before disappearing under a chair. Someone started clapping, just one person, then stopped. Tara looked like she was going to cry. Lucas looked like he wanted to vanish. I sat on my couch, heart pounding, and for the first time since the ceremony started, I wasn't shocked. Some part of me had been waiting for this. Not the exact moment or the public spectacle, but the reckoning. The truth catching up. The way Zoe's life had started to feel like someone else's project held together by perfect lighting and expensive paper. Now, the illusion had cracked, and nothing was stopping it from falling apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach through the screen and hold her hand. But all I could do was watch. Watch her stand alone in the wreckage of a wedding that was never really hers. Here is the content for Part 6B, When the World Starts Watching. Word count or dire 800. The livestream cut out shortly after the cake hit the floor. 1 second, Zoe was standing there with her shoulders squared and her face streaked with makeup, and the next, my screen went black. I tried refreshing again and again, but the connection was gone. It felt like being left behind in the middle of a story that had no ending yet. For hours, I sat there frozen. The candles I'd lit earlier had burned low, and the room smelled like wax and wilting roses. I checked my phone over and over, waiting for a message from anyone. Nothing came, no texts, no missed calls, just silence thick enough to choke on. Around midnight, a notification buzzed. It wasn't from Zoe or her parents, it was from Twitter. Zoegate was trending. The name hit me like ice water. I opened the app and found a flood of posts. Blurry videos from guests' phones, screenshots of Sabrina in the red dress, comments that flipped between disbelief and mockery, between support and pure gossip. People dissected the drama like it was a new season of reality TV, not someone's real life collapsing in real time. There was one clip, just 15 seconds of Zoe throwing the ring, another of the cake falling. A few tried to piece together the timeline like internet detectives, but no one really knew anything. They just filled in blanks with guesses that made the whole thing worse. I closed the app and sat in the dark for a long time. It felt wrong, like watching someone cry through a glass window, unable to reach them, but knowing the world was pointing and laughing. And yet I couldn't deny the strange part of me that felt relief. Not because of the disaster, but because the truth was out. Finally, undeniably. All the things I'd wondered about, the tension, the way Zoe had seemed too quiet, too posed, the way Lucas never quite looked her in the eye. It wasn't just in my head. The whole world saw it now. Still, there was a weight in knowing she didn't get to choose how it happened, that her most private breaking point had become entertainment, that strangers were sharing her pain like it was content. I hated that part. Hated how easy it was for people to forget there was a real human under the veil and behind the ring. And somewhere inside that ache, something else began to surface. I thought about the years I had spent orbiting Zoe's life, the roles I'd played, the way I'd let myself stay in the background because it felt safe, because it let me avoid conflict, because I convinced myself being loyal meant staying silent. But watching it all fall apart on screen made one thing uncomfortably clear. My silence hadn't protected her. It hadn't protected me either. It had just allowed a story to keep unfolding without anyone daring to ask if it was honest. In that moment, I realized the wedding wasn't the first thing to fall apart. It was just the first time anyone paid attention. Here is the content for Part 7, What Happened After the Stream. Froze. Word count WAD 800. Voice. The call came just after 2 a.m. My phone lit up on the coffee table, and for a second I thought it might be Zoe. But it was Tara. Her voice was shaky and too fast, like she'd been holding her breath all night. She said everything exploded after the stream cut out. Lucas didn't say a word to Zoe. He just walked out, not toward his parents, toward Sabrina. The guests were stunned. No music, no food, no exit speech. Just a room full of overdressed witnesses and silence that cracked like glass. Zoe stayed standing by the cake, not moving, like her body hadn't caught up to what just happened. Then the shouting started. Lucas's father accused Zoe's of assault. Some groomsmen tried to push a photographer. Tara said security was called but got overrun. The police showed up 30 minutes later, not for arrests, just to calm everyone down. But by then it was too late. People were crying, yelling, recording. The story had already left the room. Tara paused, and for a moment I thought the line had dropped. Then she said something I didn't expect. She admitted she knew not everything, not about the video or the red dress, but she knew Lucas had been distant, knew Zoe had started asking weird questions, knew his name kept showing up on cards with dinners he didn't mention. She said she wanted to say something, but she didn't know how, and honestly, she was scared. She had seen people turn on the messenger. She'd seen Zoe shut down when anyone questioned Lucas. So she kept quiet, smiled through fittings, defended him when Zoe vented, told herself it was just nerves, just wedding stress, just cold feet. Now she couldn't stop crying. She said Lucas's family had already sent lawyers to Zoe's hotel, demanding the return of gifts, threatening defamation lawsuits, wanting a non-disclosure agreement signed before sunrise, all while Zoe was still in her dress surrounded by broken glass and half-eaten cake. I sat there in the dark holding the phone like it might burn me. I wanted to be angry, at Tara, at Lucas, at the people who let it happen, but mostly I felt tired. tired of pretending we were ever in control of this story. Because we weren't. Not Tara, not me, not even Zoe, not really. The whole thing had been written for her, a role crafted by expectations and curated by other people's money. She just tried to play it right, and when it broke, everyone scrambled to cover the pieces. But the thing that haunted me most wasn't the scandal. It was Tara's voice when she said Zoe kept saying she felt like she was losing herself, and no one really listened. Not until it was too late. Here's the content for Part 8A, Sisterhood from Afar. Word count reaches 800. I flew out the next morning. I didn't tell Zoe ahead of time. I didn't ask if she wanted me there. I just booked the earliest flight and packed a bag with more comfort than style. When I landed, it was raining, fitting somehow. Her friend Lily picked me up from the airport silent for most of the drive, just squeezing my hand once. When we hit the exit ramp, she dropped me off in front of a quiet house with drawn blinds and too many cars parked along the curb. I knocked. No answer for a long time. Then the door creaked open and Zoe stood there in sweatpants, bare-faced hair tied up in a knot I'd never seen on her before. We didn't say anything. She stepped forward and I wrapped my arms around her like I'd been holding my breath for days. She didn't cry. Not then. She just leaned into me like someone finally letting go of a weight she had no name for. We stood there on the porch while the rain misted around us, and for the first time since the live stream, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The first day we barely talked. I made her toast. She made tea. We sat side by side on the couch wrapped in separate blankets, watching reruns of old cooking shows we used to laugh at in college. Every so often our eyes met, but we let the silence hold. By the second day, the words started to come. Not dramatic confessions, just small things. She told me her legs ached from standing too long in heels that were meant for posing, not walking. I told her I had burned popcorn 3 nights in a row. We laughed quietly like we didn't want to scare the peace away. On the third night, we sat in her bedroom with the lights low. She said she felt like a peeled version of herself. Not broken, just exposed. I said I knew the feeling. That sometimes the unraveling was the only way back to something honest. She looked at me differently then, not like the girl from her past, not like the backup plan or the safe friend who always stayed in the wings. She looked at me like someone who had shared something real, something equal. We didn't fix everything. We didn't even try, but we showed up as ourselves, not as the versions we used to play for each other, and somehow that was more than enough. Here is the content for Part 8B, When Friendship Rewrites Itself. Word count, 800. Oh, we spent the next few days gathering everything. Emails, texts, copies of receipts Zoe hadn't noticed until now. I helped her dig through old folders, screenshot messages, and organize timelines, while she sat cross-legged on the floor, her voice steadier with each hour. We didn't talk about revenge. This wasn't about that. It was about clarity, about making sure no one could rewrite what had happened and paint her as the girl who lost control at her own wedding. We watched the live stream together one night, not all of it, just the parts she couldn't remember clearly. She winced when the video showed her standing still, champagne still dripping off Lucas's lapel. But she didn't look away. She leaned into the screen and watched her own unraveling without apology. Afterward, we sat in silence. Then she whispered that the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how fast people had believed she was unstable, as if emotion made her less believable, as if anger meant she lost her worth. I told her she didn't need the internet to understand that truth didn't need a viral moment. What mattered was that she remembered who she was before everything got blurred by other people's expectations. She nodded and reached for my hand. Together, we walked into her lawyer's office with folders stacked high and heads held higher. The attorney listened carefully, flipping through evidence and pausing at the livestream screenshots I had saved. When she said we had more leverage than most people in Zoe's position, Zoe smiled for real, not the kind you force through pain. Later that night, she cooked dinner for both of us. Nothing fancy, just pasta and red sauce from a jar. She set 2 plates down and sat across from me quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me with eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. She said that in a room full of people who claimed to care, I was the only one who actually saw her. Not the version she tried to be, but the version that needed to be witnessed. The messy, human, heartbroken self she didn't know how to show anyone else. She said she would have spiraled if she had been alone. That I wasn't just her friend, I was her witness, the one who didn't look away. We didn't toast, We didn't need to. The clink of forks against plates was enough. A quiet sound that said we were starting again, not back where we were, but somewhere honest, somewhere new. Here is the content for Part 9, Outro, the backup plan, was never the plan. Word count, Fritzer, 500. If you've made it this far, thank you. I know it was a lot, it still is sometimes, but I needed to tell it. Not because it was dramatic or messy, though it was both. I needed to say it out loud, because for a long time, I thought being quiet made me safe. What I've learned is that silence doesn't protect you. It just keeps you small, and love the real kind never asks you to shrink. You don't need to be someone's first choice to be worthy of truth, respect, or connection. If you've ever felt like the background character in your own life, I see you. Maybe you've been the quiet friend, the fixer, the one who always gets left out of the main story. Maybe you've learned to settle for a role that felt easier than risking rejection. I know how heavy that can feel, but you're allowed to want more. You're allowed to take up space, to ask better questions, to choose friendships that hold you in return. It's not weakness to walk away from people who only love the version of you that stays quiet. I'd love to hear your story. What roles have you outgrown? What truths did you uncover when you finally stopped performing? Share in the comments if you want to, or just sit with it quietly and know you're not alone. Because here's the thing, the backup plan was never the plan. You've always been worth the full story, not the edited one, not the filtered version, the honest one, and it's never too late to start living it.